Hello there, Ramblers, and welcome back to Reese Rambles, my weekly podcast all about the latest comings and goings, movings and shakings, and indeed all the rest of it in the worlds of vintage and retro computing, gaming, and technology. I'm Reese from the YouTube channel Control-Alt-Reese. I assume you know that if you're watching this, but if not, there is a link to my main channel down in the description, as well as links to listen to this podcast on the various different podcasting platforms and watch it on YouTube. So, thank you ever so much for joining me, and it looks like it's going to be another gloriously warm and sunny weekend here in the UK. Now, I don't have any charity endeavours to pimp out to you all this week, so I'm going to dive straight in with the very first story. And you may have noticed, if you are watching this on YouTube, a prop that I have here on the desk with me today. But for the benefit of you who are listening to this on the podcasting platforms, this is a boxed copy of Red Hat Linux 6.1, which was released way back in 1999. Of course, nowadays you can go onto your favourite Linux distro's website and download it, burn it onto a USB stick in a matter of minutes. Of course, stuff like Ubuntu and Linux Mint and stuff like that, kind of the most popular. Fedora as well, of course, which was a spin-off of Red Hat Linux itself, kind of the most popular distros, and it's very, very easy nowadays. But back in those days, of course, it was a very different kettle of fish, with download speeds being much slower, and of course, Linux kind of being pushed as a kind of a more commercial offering. Those companies kind of starting to push it as a competitor to Windows and offering paid support and everything else that came along with it. Still very much a thing nowadays in the corporate world, of course, but it had its beginnings in distros just like Red Hat, just like this one here. So this was the topic of a couple of videos on my channel, I should say, just before we dive into this story. So let's have a look at those. And the first one actually ended up being one of the most popular videos on my channel. So what's this? 143,000 views 7 months ago. And this is installing Linux like it's 1999. So I actually installed this on a first generation Pentium system, my tiny PC, Pentium 133. And that is relevant to this story, so we will loop back to that in a second. But it was quite a fun adventure just seeing how Linux worked way back all those years ago. I mean, 99 was when I kind of first started playing with it, so interesting to revisit that period in my life. And then, because that video did do so well, and because there were quite a lot of people wanting a bit of a closer look at the included desktop environments, applications and stuff, I went on to do a part 2, a bit of a spin-off as well, which was called Exploring Red Hat Linux 6.1 1999 on original hardware. And you can see the PC itself there, and learned quite a lot about those early versions of the GNOME and KDE desktops, which of course are still the most popular desktop environments on Linux today. Thankfully, loads of other options available as well. Lots of excellent high-quality options. So, so interesting to see how far it had come. And actually, it was surprisingly easy to install this, and there weren't really all that many issues to kind of overcome. Obviously, the inevitable, sound and networking-related stuff, but it turned out that it was actually quite easy just to tweak those and get stuff up and running. Even all those years ago in 1999. Well, why am I talking about this now? Well, unfortunately, I won't be able to do that anymore. So up until the very latest kernel release, it would have been possible for me to download a modern-day distro like, say, Debian or something like that, and install it on that Pentium PC, but that is no longer going to be the case. And this was a story that was submitted over on my Discord server by Technic, so thank you ever so much for this submission, and it is on the register. So without further ado, without further waffling, let's take a bit of a dive into this story. So the headline here is Linux kernel to drop 486 and early 586 support. Get in the bin. For the first time since 2012, some older CPU generations are being chopped. And we'll find out what happened back in 2012 as well, a little bit further down this story. But this is a story from Leon Proven, so thank you ever so much. So this is the upcoming kernel 6.15 release. And it says here that it looks like it will eliminate support for Intel's 486 chip and its contemporaries. The next version of the Linux kernel is progressing towards release. Release Candidate 5 appeared over the weekend, and we expect the kernel itself will probably officially arrive around the end of May or early June. What we feel is one of the most interesting changes is the removal of support for several chips from the 32-bit 80486 era. The change is a patch from kernel veteran Ingo Molnar and removes nearly 15,000 lines of code. It increases the features that the x86-32 CPU must support in order to run kernel 6.15 and later to include the timestamp counter and the CMPX CHG8B software instruction. Wow. Well done, Reese. That instruction is accidentally rather famous and has its own Intel erratum. In specific circumstances on buggy revisions of Intel Silicon, it inadvertently completely locks up the processor, preventing it from doing anything at all until a reset. This happens regardless of whether the instruction is executed in an application or operating system and causes a denial of service. Now, it goes on to explain that this was known as the FOOF bug, the F00F bug, which was quite infamous back in its day on those kind of first generation Intel CPUs. And the reason I mentioned earlier that this particular PC was relevant is because when I installed this copy of Red Hat 6.1 on this Pentium 133 PC from 1996, it did indeed, during the boot, come up with a message saying that it was actually susceptible to the FOOF bug and that the workaround had been implemented in this particular version of Red Hat Linux. So, yeah, this very CPU is going to be one of the ones that's affected by this change. Not that I really had any inclination at all to run a modern-day version of Linux on this, although I must say, that's quite tempting, isn't it? It does make you wonder. Potential future video idea there. Anyway. So, it basically explains here in the register story that this only affected Pentium processors with the original Intel P5 microarchitecture, which was first released in 1993. It was fixed in revised silicon and as a workaround for those with faulty chips with operating system level mitigations, like that patch that I mentioned. So, in other words, this kernel change, the requirement for CMPX CHG8B, removes support for processors older than the original Intel Pentium, meaning the Intel i486 family and a handful of closely related early 586 processors, such as the IDT Win chip and AMD Elan family. I think, was it Retrobytes did a really good video recently on the IDT CPUs, I think, on the Win chips. Is that right? Maybe it was a different channel. Don't know. I'll try and have a look at that. Have a look for that for you. But yeah, so that includes the chips that were marketed as 485 SLC processors, which were essentially a 386SX with extra CPU instructions from the 80486 line added. In turn, that means that it effectively removes support for the last x86 chips that didn't include onboard hardware floating point units, which means that the kernel can also jettison its support for emulating an Intel World FPU in software. The removal of that code makes up the majority of the parts that were deleted, but the remainder is still over 1,000 lines. So yeah, of those 15,000 lines of code that were removed from this upcoming kernel release, the majority of them were actually to do with emulating FPUs or floating point units on those early SX CPUs that didn't have a hardware floating point support on board. So yeah, it's quite a major change, actually. And it's just saying, it again goes on to explain here that Linus Torvalds, the guy who actually invented the Linux kernel and still leads its development to this day, actually proposed getting rid of 486 support back in 2022, but he was outvoted by the other people on the kind of kernel development committee, if you like. I'm not a kernel developer. I'm not quite sure what the exact terminology is for that. But yeah, he actually proposed that back in 2022 and was outvoted because, of course, they are mostly democratic, not quite a dictatorship headed up by Linus. Although I think in some circumstances in the past that it has gone that way. But yeah, so that's that. Future releases of Linux will no longer be supporting 486 and early 586 Pentium CPUs, which is a bit of the end of an era, really, but quite impressive stuff, considering that, yeah, as the article says, we're talking about CPUs from the very early 90s here. I mean, those Pentiums were 1993, as it says here. Obviously, the 486 was a little bit earlier than that. Sort of 1990, 91-ish. We're talking, 35-year-old hardware here that's finally no longer going to be supported by this brand new kernel. And of course, it's going to be a while. Of course, there will be early releases of the kernel, which still will be considered to be current and will still be getting security updates of stuff. And I'm sure there will be some interested parties, with it all being open source, also committing security fixes and stuff, backporting them to those earlier versions. So yeah, although support has officially been dropped, I'm pretty sure those CPUs will be supported in some capacity for the foreseeable future anyway, for anyone who is still running Linux on them. And it'd be interesting. I guess there's probably still some industrial stuff that's running on 486 type stuff, maybe some military applications of that, stuff like that. And it does also mention that NetBSD will continue to support those early 486 CPUs. So if you need to run some flavor of Unix on your 486 machine, you can always go to NetBSD and give that a try if you want. So still some options out there, but yeah, end of an era for the Linux kernel. Also gives me a good opportunity to pimp out my earlier video, one that I was particularly pleased with and one that has done particularly well. So evidently it went down quite well with my audience. And kind of my kind of earliest experiences of Linux were on kind of that era of hardware. So I guess time marches on, technology marches on, and that's the way it is. I'll have to optimize things, remove a load of code that, of course, had maintenance requirements and stuff on it, and kind of move on with modern hardware support. That's the way of the world. And there you go. And just before we jump into the next story, I'd just like to give a very quick shout out to this episode's sponsor, PCBWay.com. Now, of course, you're probably familiar with PCBWay's work already, thanks to their 10 plus years of experience in the world of PCB fabrication, not to mention all of their excellent support for myself and my fellow retro creators. But they have also started offering some additional services, which include 3D printing, CNC machining, and injection molding, among many, many others. So if any of those are a requirement for your next fabrication project, please do give PCBWay a try by checking out their link down in the description, or indeed in the show notes if you are listening to this on your podcast platform. Thanks once again to PCBWay for supporting Reese Rambles, and now on to the next story. I must admit, the World Video Game Hall of Fame is an institution that I wasn't really all that familiar with until I had this submission land on my desk today from Kosiak. But I'm going to roll with this because this is something that is run by the Strong National Museum of Play in New York, which in itself is quite a prestigious institution. So, hey, this must mean something. And as you can probably tell, I don't really have much of a preamble for this. So let's just go straight to the website. And the website in question this time around is Rock Paper Shotgun, themselves quite a prestigious institution in the world of gaming, I guess, or at least certainly a name that's been around for a very long time. So the story here by Nick Rubin, the headline is Tamagotchi and Quake both join the World Video Game Hall of Fame. So there we go. New York's Strong National Museum of Play has welcomed 4 new entries into its Video Game Hall of Fame. Quake, GoldenEye, 1981's arcade side-scroller Defender, and the virtual pet Tamagotchi. And I must say, I can't really argue with any of those 4 entries. They're certainly all quite pivotal moments in their own right when it comes to video games, I guess. I guess Tamagotchi, arguably, it's a piece of hardware, it's a toy, but it's software, it's a game, it has a game aspect to it, I suppose. And this is something that is discussed in the article. So I guess we'll just read this and see what they have to say. So it's that last one that's by far the most interesting of the 4 picks. And I must admit, I'd never actually thought about Tamagotchi in these exact terms before. And there is actually a very interesting embedded video here, which is a documentary on the history of Quake. Well worth checking out the article for that video as well. But yes, here's the aforementioned museum on Tamagotchi's inclusion. Beyond cultivating nostalgia, Tamagotchi offered a distinct form of play apart from the prevailing popularity of video game electronics at the time. In the book Millennial Monsters, Japanese Toys and the Global Imagination from 2006, scholar Anne Allison argued that Tamagotchi provided young users with feelings of connection, intimacy and personalization, a respite from competition and fighting games. Yeah, you know what? We'll roll with that. I like that. I actually had a Tamagotchi back in the day. I remember seeing them on, was it Tomorrow's World on the BBC or something like that? Or maybe it was on one of the kids programs like Blue Peter or something like that at the time. Now, I remember it took a while for them to come to the UK. I remember it being covered as kind of this weird Japanese thing, and people didn't really kind of understand what it was about. It's like, oh, it's this virtual pet, and you have to feed it and keep it entertained and keep it happy. And if you don't look after it properly, it'll die. And then a lot of the talk around the playground and stuff at the time was like, once it's dead, it's dead forever. It's like a single-use thing, which actually turned out to not be true. But Yeah, when they did finally arrive in the UK, I remember begging and pleading with my parents to get me one for Christmas, and they actually did. My sister and I both got our very own Tamagotchis, and I've still got mine somewhere. I think it's actually around the studio here somewhere, but yeah, I actually have a bit of a soft spot for the Tamagotchi, and of course, not to mention the other entries here: Quake, GoldenEye, and Defender, which are things I've talked about in the past. But anyway. Let's get back to the article. We're getting distracted again, aren't we? It must be the weather. This is purely speculative on my part. I'd love for someone to give me a little more context or insight. But the first Tamagotchi was released in 1996, the same year as SNES farming game Stardew Valley, influence Harvest Moon, and the original Pokemon. Taken together, that's an incredibly influential year for contemporary non-violent or cozy titles. And I do wonder if these 3 games, or 2 games and Tamagotchi, depending on your view, themselves share common influences. Oh, okay, so they're saying that Harvest Moon and Pokemon were also 1996. Interesting observation. Of course, other kind of non-violent games. When I say I'd never thought of Tamagotchi as a video game, I don't mean it in not a real game sense either. Just that it hadn't actually occurred to me to think about it in what we might broadly call video game canon or history. But I came around to the idea pretty quickly, honestly. Now I think about it, Tamagotchi might actually have been my first exposure to permadeath. I once lost one for months, eventually finding it under my bed to behold my beloved pet dying in a mountain of its own excrement. Brutal stuff. As for Quake's inclusion, the strong focus is on its use of 3D space, as well as the popularity of its competitive multiplayer, central to the creation of esports as an industry. Yep, it was also, they point out, the first shooter to get widespread mod support, spawning the likes of Team Fortress 2. These 4 editions bring the Hall of Fame's total up to 49 games. The earliest entry is Space War, which of course was the first arcade game, wasn't it, which is based on computer space. Have I got that the right way around? I think there's a picture of me, or maybe it's the other way around. Space War was the first one on the PDP computers, wasn't it? And then Computer Space was the arcade game that was based on that. I don't know. As usual, I probably should have done some research. But the most recent is The Last of Us. Very interesting to me that The Last of Us made it into the Video Game Hall of Fame before Quake. But there you go. We like to complain about irritating uses of punctuation in game names here at RPS, but I suppose that they've been with us since the beginning, which of course is a reference to Space War. Anyway, so there you go. Quake, Defender, GoldenEye, and the Tamagotchi have been officially inducted into the Strong National Museum of Play Video Game Hall of Fame. And to be honest, I don't really dispute any of those. I think they're all very worthy entries to this prestigious list, recognising their influence and their contributions to the world of gaming. I'm sure that many of you ramblers out there, much like me, will have been involved in LAN parties at some point in your long and illustrious gaming careers. I know some of my earliest memories, I remember going to work with my dad when I was a kid, obviously in the school holidays, and helping out with some of his IT stuff, and generally just sort of hanging around playing games on the office computers and bugging people in the office and distracting them from their jobs. But I do remember getting Doom and even Quake up and running on their office network way back in the day, and playing those games when they were still current. So I guess you could call that a LAN party, although not really. I mean, it was a load of kind of middle-aged engineers with kind of a passing interest in that kind of stuff, being coerced into playing games with the boss's son. But yeah, a little bit later on, when I built my very first PC when I was in college, obviously not my first, but the first PC I built for myself, I specifically designed that for LAN parties. So it was a small form factor system, ITX, one of those kind of early ITX systems. Pentium 4 HT, 2.8 gigahertz. It had an FX 5200 graphics card. Don't judge me too much for that. I was a poor student at the time, and I very distinctly remember the case. I had like a aluminium checker plate style wrap on it, and it had a case window and a cold cathode light inside, and it had handles on the top as well. It was a really cool thing, very kind of custom build. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of that, which is kind of one of my biggest regrets. Yeah, something that might be quite fun to recreate at some point. But yeah, and then of course onto the original Xbox, taking that round friends' houses and hooking them up and playing Halo and stuff like that. And Unfortunately, LAN parties are something that's kind of died out a bit nowadays with online gaming and everything else. Everyone just sticks their headsets on and sits at home on their sofa and, kind of chats to their friends that way, which is a bit of a shame because I did enjoy the kind of in-person aspect of it and the consumption of certain things and, the loud music. And, it was a whole scene. It was a lot of fun. Well, thanks to a story submitted by Hardly Worgan71, one of my long-term fans and submitters and commenters. So thank you ever so much for this. You can now relive those days, and it's surprising that it's taken this long for someone to come up with a comprehensive simulation of LAN party organisation, but there you go. So the link is to a tweet over on x.com. And this is from Leap Game Studios. So there is a very short trailer here. And this looks really cool. So essentially, it's someone going around various settings, like an office and a living room and stuff. And you can set up the PCs, you can plug in the monitors, plug in all of the peripherals and stuff. And basically, you get to organise your own LAN party and invite people and... there's a whole kind of a story element to this as well, which I have discovered by doing a little bit of further digging. So, there is... I did uncover this story over on gamesradar.com. So the headline here, LAN Party Adventures captures the spirit of the early 2000s, but now with added mystery. Where is Pedro? So initially I thought that this was just going to be like a LAN party simulation type thing where you get to set up all of the PCs and, perhaps a bit of a management type thing where you get to advertise it and invite people and that kind of stuff. And maybe, I don't know, as things progress, maybe you can upgrade to better hardware or bigger venues and stuff like that, is how it went in my mind. But it turns out there's actually a bit of a mystery to this as well, a bit of a story, which I think is really cool. I think this is quite interesting what they've done here. So, LAN Party Adventures just got revealed as part of Future Games Show Live, and it absolutely captures some serious nostalgia for the early 2000s, right? Games Radar. As the game's name suggests, part of what you'll be doing in the game is setting up a good old-fashioned LAN party, complete with perfect dial-up internet tones. That includes making sure your chunky grey desktop PC is linked up to your monitor with the right cables, and then jumping through the required hoops to get on the clunky internet of the times. It's going to be a beautiful mess of cabling and peripherals. Oh, that takes me back. Wow. However, it's not just about the setup, as your pal Pedro is also missing. In order to find out what's happened to him, you have to collaborate with your LAN party pals, solving puzzles and following digital clues. A series of LAN parties will bring you to the truth, but will also present fresh opportunities to make your setups even grander by unlocking various upgrades and new tools. Outside of the mystery of Pedro, you can also dive into sandbox mode, which will let you dial up your parties from net cafes all the way to industry-scale events. Grab retro-inspired posters and seemingly endless accessories and start customizing your computers for the ultimate LAN party experience without the real-life pain of dial-up. LAN Party Adventures is due to launch later this year on PC via Steam. Interesting, the kind of focus on dial-up here. I don't know if it's just part of this story by Sam Loveridge, or if it is kind of going to be an integral part of the game. I know the LAN parties that I was involved with back in the day were certainly very much offline affairs. Of course, the whole point of a LAN or a local area network being that it's all kind of self-contained, and dial-up isn't, you can't really have people dialing in from other locations over dial-up with the lag and everything else. But anyway, of course, it's a nostalgia fest. I can see why they would want to integrate that kind of aspect of early 2000s living, so why not? Why not? And this has a page over on Steam. So the name of the game is LAN Party Adventures, and this is being developed by Leap Game Studios. I can't see a specific release date here other than 2025, but if you want to see some screenshots of some of the LAN Party venues, Goom, that's really cool. It's the various LAN party venues, and there's a bit of an early 2000s net cafe there with a System Shock poster on the wall. I can see, I think that's a Deus Ex poster there in the background. We've got laying out the peripherals on the tables, so keyboards and mice, and plugging all the cables in and things. Picture of what looks like somebody's loft here, somebody's bedroom loft setup, Counter-Strike poster. I mean, this is a proper nostalgia fest for people of a certain age who were involved with PC gaming, or indeed that whole LAN party scene back in the day. So I think this looks really, really interesting. I'm going to wishlist this. I won't do it right now because I don't think I'm logged in at the moment. Oh, I am logged in at the moment. There we go. I'll add it to my wish list. So yeah, very much looking forward to this coming out later in the year. So yeah, plug in and play. It features an adventure story, a nostalgia-filled single-player adventure with job sim features, 2000s tech, VGA cables, manage speeds, avoid viruses, master the command line, and a sandbox mode where you can just build your own LAN parties to your heart's content. And yeah, I love the concept of this, a LAN party management sim. Not really something I've seen before. It's probably something that's been attempted before and it's just passed me by. But yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on this. I'll certainly be keeping an eye on this, and I will keep you updated, I promise. Looks very cool. Another Linux story now, and indeed another story from The Register, who are certainly getting a bit of love this week from the Ramblers, and why not? They're a bit of an old stalwart in their own right when it comes to the world of retro computing. So thank you ever so much to Gravitone for bringing this to my attention. And this is all about Commodore OS 3, which is a new Linux distribution, and there is quite a lot to this. This isn't just another fly-by-night, minor tweak to Linux. This is quite the impressive thing. So hold on to your butts. So, a Commodore-themed talking Linux desktop, complete with hundreds of games, makes for the biggest distro we've seen yet, reports Liam Proven, yet again, over on The Register. In the halcyon days of 2011, The Register reported on a plan to make a modern PC clone in the classic form factor of the Commodore 64, after CEO Barry Altman had some troubles licensing the Commodore name. Eventually resolved. The product did in fact launch, although sadly Altman died the following year. Now, My Retro Computer owns the rights and the design, and you can still buy the case. I think I remember that story, actually. Should we have a look at this case? You know what? Let's take a detour. I am very easily distracted. This is miniitx.com. Oh, wow, look at that. Yes, I remember these. These Commodore 64 ITX cases. Wow, they're still a thing. That is so cool. I got completely distracted here. Anyway, that's £175. I'm going to link to that down below if you're interested in buying and building one of those. Or, miniitx.com. If you want to send one over for a sponsored video, I'd be very much up for that. But anyway, so easily distracted. Anyway, what is more interesting to the Reg FOSS desk, FOSS being free open source software, of course, is that this machine has its own OS, a Linux distribution called Commodore OS. Developer Leo Nigro of Commodore USA just released version 3.0. Internally, it describes itself as Commodore OS Vision 3.0 Beta 8. And we have a screenshot here, and look at this. This is quite the impressive looking thing, isn't it? And the Register does indeed go on to talk about some of the visual effects and stuff that have been kind of implemented here. So I found this quite retro, actually. Yeah, I remember tinkering with Linux distros and stuff back in kind of the early 2000s that were doing some really wacky stuff with transparency effects and wobbly windows and drop shadows and, really crazy sort of GPU accelerated stuff that was quite out there. And it's nice to see that someone is still carrying that torch. So let's get back to the story. Commodore OS 3 is based on MX Linux 23.4, but it's been extensively customized. In fact, in some 30 years of experimenting with Linux, this vulture can say he has never seen a distro this tricked out with visual and sound effects. We suggest closely reading the installation instructions and following them. It's also seriously big. The ISO file is 37.85 gigabytes in size. Remember when Linux distributions used to fit on a CD? Yeah, I think those days are long gone. But part of this is because of the 204 Linux games that are pre-installed, but there is also a large assortment of emulators covering 10 models of Commodore kit from the PET via the C16, the C64 and the Plus4 to several models of Amiga and about 30 other platforms besides. Is that not pretty much every single machine that Commodore ever made? Yeah, certainly well covered there. I actually really like the look of this desktop. It does look very cool, doesn't it? Yeah, it's kind of it's got this blue theme to it, and it's got this kind of this glow around the windows and things. Yeah, not really like anything else I've ever seen before. Certainly a departure from the very kind of boring flat design of stuff like Windows 10. But anyway, not all the emulators work out of the box, of course. You do need some proprietary ROMs, but hey, they're easy enough to track down in this day and age. And of course, it's based on MX Linux, so you know that the underlying Linux distribution is going to be supported. And, with updates and stuff. So, yeah, they have tested this over at the Register, and they have installed it and played with it themselves. It uses the Mate desktop, although it looks like this has been quite heavily quite heavily customized. So it's been tricked out with a custom theme, sound effects, startup music, and the Orca screen reader enabled by default. So your computer talks in a robotic voice. Mousing over the icons in the translucent 3D dock makes them spin, and clicking on one makes it burst into flames before opening. I like this. Then a transparent ghost of the window zooms up to full size. Windows don't just wobble. When closed, they dissolve into spinning blocks. Tooltips spin into and out of view. And of course, switching between virtual desktops uses a rotating cube. Although the mouse pointer is somewhat Amiga style in that it's red and rakishly angled, it's also 3D and spins on its axis. The console font is a reproduction of the C64's screen font, and the default Linux terminal prompt is Commodore at Commodore. Ready. That tells you that the machine name is Commodore with a capital C, and so is the default user account. And the default password is C equals, which is a nod to CBM's classic chicken head logo, of course. The more I look at this with this cube transition thing, yeah, this very much reminds me of some of these kind of early 2000s Linux distros with their wacky desktop effects and stuff. I'm going to have to add this to the list of stuff to check out on the channel because this looks absolutely immense. I do love the look of this. But yeah, it's quite a long story. It does go into a lot of detail. Of course, they have tested this in-house and explored it themselves. So this will be linked in the usual places down below if you want to read up a bit more on this Commodore OS 3 release. But yeah, the inclusion of all of those games and all of those emulators and stuff and the wacky desktop effects, I really like what they're doing here. They're doing something very different here. It's built on a solid foundation with MX Linux underneath as well. So, yeah, ticks all the boxes for me. This looks like a very cool project indeed. When I was a kid, I very much enjoyed the games of Jeff Minter on my Atari STE, and I do very distinctly remember seeing his name coming up on screen and the messages about them being shareware and about sending off some payment to a random address in Wales to register the games and, of course, get the full versions. In my case, it was Llamatron, which was his clone of Robotron, although I didn't actually know that Robotron was a thing at the time. As a 10-year-old, I just thought it was a fun game with a load of weird stuff flying around the screen. And there was also Revenge of the Mutant Camels as well, which was the sequel to Attack of the Mutant Camels, which I think came out on the Commodore 64. And it was a two-player side-scrolling shooter-type game where player one played as a camel, and player two was a goat, and you could jump around the screen independently, or indeed the goat could ride the camel, which was quite amusing, playing it with my friends as a kid. And of course, I had no idea at the time how kind of important Jeff Minter's work would be in the wider context of gaming and the kind of stuff that he would go on to achieve. I mean, he's still developing games today and working on current up-to-date platforms with his own particular flavour of weird and wonderful beast-themed psychedelic creations, I think it's fair to say. Of course, he did famously did the visualizer for the Xbox 360, the music visualizer, which was a kind of an extension of his work on the Atari Jaguar CD. Of course, Tempest 2000 on the Atari Jaguar. But yeah, Tempest games on current systems. And hey, I don't need to name every single thing that he's done. But if you are interested in learning a bit more about his work, of course, there was a collection that was released a couple of years ago from Digital Eclipse called Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story. And this was built on the same platform that they used for the Atari 50th anniversary collection as well. So always happy to give this a shout out. I do own this on the PC, and it's always fun to kind of fire it up and have a bit of a poke around and learn a bit about his history and about some of his early games and stuff. So this has everything from his early work on the ZX81, the VIC-20, the Commodore 64, the Spectrum, Atari 8-bit stuff, the Konix multi-system, that's an ill-fated console from back in the day. It's Atari ST, of course, it's got Llamatron on there with modern controls as well, I must say, so you can play it with the twin sticks and stuff. Tempest 2000 from the Jaguar, and of course it has a Grid Runner remastered as well, a new release for that collection. Highly, highly recommended. But yeah, why am I talking about this now? Because this has been out for a few years, and I did actually talk about this when it was released in a Ramble, whenever it was, all those many, many episodes ago. Well, the reason I'm talking about this now is because a lot of this content that was produced for this collection was in conjunction with a documentary that was a work in progress called Heart of Neon. Now, this documentary has been in progress for a very, very long time now. I've been following them on social media and stuff, and it was really nice to see some of the fruits of their work be released as part of this collection. But of course, what we've all been waiting for is the standalone full-length 90-minute documentary on Jeff Minter himself, all based on first-hand experience, first-hand interviews with the big man himself. And it seems that it is now coming very, very soon, because there is a Kickstarter which has appeared this week. Now, I will say the Kickstarter hasn't actually started yet. This is launching soon, but you can go and sign up to be notified if you have a Kickstarter account, so you can be one of the first to know when it does start. And hopefully I'll be able to give you an update on this at some point. Thank you to James from Encott Technology, the YouTube channel, for bringing this to my attention, by the way, this Kickstarter. And yeah, I mean, let's have a look at the limited information that we have available on this page. So, of course, this is Paul Doherty, who is responsible for producing this documentary under the name Heart of Neon. And it reads thusly: welcome to our Kickstarter campaign to produce the physical Blu-ray release of Heart of Neon, a 90-minute feature documentary that explores the birth and evolution of the home video game industry from the unique perspective of one of its earliest pioneers, Jeff Minter. And there he is himself with his 2004 sheep calendar. Jeff Minter is an exceptional video game developer who for decades has remained independent in an industry where corporations dictate the terms. Heart of Neon charts Jeff's career from pioneer to legend, mapping the territory Jeff traversed and examining how his Llamasoft brand remains a beacon to everyone inspired by the same purity Jeff admires in classic arcade gaming. Heart of Neon is by the same team that partnered with Digital Eclipse to bring you Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story. This film is a spiritual sequel to that project. Heart of Neon digs deeper into Jeff as a person and as a game development pioneer, and the film ventures further into Jeff's career, charting the exhilarating highs and wretched lows of Jeff's indie video game life after Tempest 2000. And we've got some clips here from the documentary, so they've got some historical footage and stuff. I see that's him at some kind of Xbox event with his music visualizer running on the screen behind him there, so that'll be quite interesting to hear the story behind how that all came together. And yeah, the Kickstarter concludes here by saying, there is no one like Jeff Minter. This is his story. This is your chance to own a physical copy that can live on your shelf forever. Pledge today. So there you go. I am very much interested in this. I love backing these little projects like this. I must admit, I'll probably just get the download version and watch that rather than messing around with the Blu-ray. But still a nice thing to stick on a shelf and a nice thing to have as part of the collection, as someone who has been a fan of Minter's work for so long. So yeah, nice to see that this is finally turning into an actual tangible physical thing, and something that I've been very much looking forward to for years. So that's the Kickstarter for Heart of Neon, the Jeff Minter Llamasoft documentary, and I will keep you updated in a future ramble and let you know when this is ready. But for now, you can certainly go to the Kickstarter page and you can click on the Notify Me button, and you'll be among the first to know, including myself, when this thing goes live. Very, very good stuff. And that, my dear Rambler, brings us around quite neatly to my regular Video of the Week feature, wherein I talk about a video that I have seen here on the YouTubes in the previous week that has entertained or enlightened or educated or otherwise improved my life in some way, and that I think that you will also enjoy. Quite often they are retro related and quite often they aren't, but this week I have 3 videos for you. And one of these has probably come up on your radar already if you are the least bit interested in the subject matter. But because I talked about this last week and I talked about the delay, it seems only fair to mention the fact that, yeah, literally the day after I recorded that, a new trailer dropped. So this is GTA 6, and I'll only briefly mention this because, like I say, if you're interested in this, you've probably seen it already. But yeah, as you might expect from Rockstar, from one of the biggest gaming companies in the world, the biggest game franchise in the world, a massively, massively anticipated game, of course, has now been delayed until May 2026. But this looks absolutely stunning, doesn't it? Especially considering it's a year off from release as well. Just the amount of detail and stuff in here and the graphics and everything else. Wouldn't expect any less from a GTA game, and it looks... yeah, it looks absolutely brilliant. There are plenty of other channels out there dedicated to picking this thing apart and trying to spot all the little hidden details and things and how it connects back to previous games. So I certainly won't go over all of that. But as someone who has been a fan of the franchise since the very first game way back in 1997, I can't let this one pass me by, and it is one that I'm very much looking forward to. So, of course, that will be linked in the usual places if you, for some reason, you haven't seen it yet, or if you want to go check it out. Maybe this is the first you're hearing about it. Maybe you want to go and watch it again because it looks amazing. You know, that's entirely up to you. But Let's move on to something a bit more retro related. So this is a video that I actually watched this morning. It kept coming up on my radar, and I've seen links to this being posted around in various places. I've had it come up in my recommendations as well. And I've actually followed this guy on Instagram for years and I had no idea that this was a spin-off, that was a spin-off from his YouTube channel, Joseph's Machines. And what he does is, well, he builds all sorts of interesting machines and contraptions and stuff. And he is, he's very, very good at what he does. And his content is very kind of kid-friendly, very family-friendly. It's very fun and very kind of upbeat. And if you've not come across his channel, definitely worth going and checking out some of his other videos. In fact, look, I haven't even subscribed to this. There you go. Because that's certainly what I'm intending on doing. I've only seen short clips of them on Instagram. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to go and check out his back catalogue of work. But in this particular video, the title of which being I Made a Wallace and Gromit Contraption in Real Life, he actually builds a Wallace, if you're familiar with Wallace and Gromit's 1993 film, The Wrong Trousers. He builds Gromit's bed, and he describes it as a breakfast machine here, but it's kind of a bit more than that. His whole kind of bed setup, his whole contraption that automatically tips him out of bed and dresses him, and you've got the toast popping up out of the toaster with the jam that's fired at the toast and hits it at exactly the right time. And what Joseph does in this video is he actually builds his own version of that, all fully functional, all real. There's no CGI trickery or anything like that. He explains how it all works. Quite dangerous as well in places. And yeah, with a real life dog as well a trained dog to represent Gromit's part in that film. And I like this video. I like the ingenuity of it. I like the kind of cobbled together aspect of the whole setup that he builds here. And just comes across as a really nice guy. It's a really nice video. So big fan of the Wallace and Gromit series of films as well. So well worth checking out if you are interested in those and in people building and making stuff. Yeah, it's a real highlight of my week, actually, sadly enough. So that's 9 minutes and 34 seconds long. And another video that I've seen it doing the rounds quite a lot, and I watched this last night and thought this was absolutely fascinating. I actually sat down and actually watched it properly, which is unusual for me. I think quite often YouTube videos are, or they can be background noise, can't they? But this is Matt KC. And he has been working on this project for the longest time to reverse engineer Lego Island, that PC game from back in the 90s. He's been working on this for over a year now, and he's roped in a load of other very talented kind of retro developers as well. And they have finally completed their decomposition of this game, which means they have reverse engineered the final retail game back into its original source code, so they can make modifications and improvements to this, get it running on modern systems, and make all sorts of tweaks and things, and fix some long-standing bugs and things to do with running the game on modern operating systems. So it's a really interesting story. Matt KC he's evidently very, very intelligent when it comes to this development stuff, and very, very knowledgeable. But he's also very good at explaining it as well in a way that I think the rest of us can understand. I mean, I am a developer in my day job, which probably helps, but I thought this was a fascinating story. He tells the whole story of what he's been up to over the past year or so, how this project came together, the other developers that are kind of involved in the project, and kind of the steps that they took to reverse engineer this game and decompile it, and also some kind of hints at some kind of future potential for this as well, and what they can kind of do with this going forward now they have finished this. Of course, retro technology does feature quite heavily in this. He's used period correct development tools and compilers and things as part of this project, and it is indeed a retro game in and of its own right. So yeah, I do vaguely remember. I say vaguely remember. I did play Lego Island, although I didn't play it as a kid. I think it's something I kind of stumbled across as a teenager when I was a bit too old for it, and installed it on the family's PC and kind of had a bit of a tinker with it for a bit, but it, wasn't really my kind of thing. I think I was more into like Quake and Duke Nukem 3D and even maybe Half-Life and stuff at that time. So it didn't hold my attention for very long. But yeah, his passion for this game, I think, is very, very evident in these videos that he's been putting together about this whole process, and of course in the end result as well. Just a fascinating process, and he has tracked down the rights holders for the game to try to inquire as to the possibility of some kind of official remaster or re-release. And this even, as he explains in the video, also came up on Lego's radar as well, and he was contacted by Lego, who were quite interested in what he was doing. if nothing else, to kind of document the game and have these things kind of preserved in their own archives as well. So he's kind of also done some work with them. So yeah, really, really interested and kind of convoluted story. Very, very well told. And the technical side of it is absolutely fascinating as well. At least I found it fascinating. So yeah, 39 minutes and 13 seconds. So certainly one to sit down and watch on the old living room TV over maybe a dinner and a few glasses of wine, perhaps. But yeah, so cool to see this project finally coming together. Like I say, not a game that I really played as a kid. I think it was a little bit later on for me, but it's always cool to see these projects and how they work and how they end up coming together. So there you go, 3 videos of the week for you. A GTA 6 trailer, a guy building a real-life machine from one of the Wallace & Gromit films, and a retro game getting reverse engineered. So certainly a mixed bag. And that is all I have for you for this week's Ramble. So thank you ever so much for joining me once more. Of course, just a little reminder that these go out on YouTube, on my second channel, Reese Rambles, and indeed on all of the podcast platforms as well. So if you fire up your favourite podcasting client, Spotify or iTunes or whatever else, and search for Reese Rambles, you should be able to find me in there. Links to all of the stories that I have covered in this Ramble, as always, will be down in the description or indeed in the show notes in your podcast client, as well as some other interesting related links and bits and bobs for you to check out. So these go out on a Friday at 2 minutes to midnight UK time. But that's all I got for you. So thank you ever so much. Nothing on my main channel again this week. I am working on a bit of a project at the moment, and I'm going to get back to that once I've got this uploaded now. But yeah, that's all I have for you. So thank you ever so much. Go out, enjoy the sunshine, have a bit of a barbecue or something. And yeah, I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Bye.